Hi, I'm Tom Callahan, and welcome to Only Seniors, the show where we talk about senior care issues, senior living, and encore careers, and life stories of people. If you ever saw the movie Schindler's List, you will remember a section of it where, as somebody was being led away, they turned back to those who they were leaving behind and said, "Tell my story." My guest today is Steve Besserman, and he's not telling his story, but he's telling his mother's story. Steve, welcome to Only Seniors.
Thank you so much, Tom.
You have a very interesting past. I understand you worked for CBS TV.
I did. I worked for CBS Television for about 15 years.
And what did you do for them?
For most of my time there, I was responsible for a small department that took feature films that people would see in the movie theaters that were eventually sold licensed to television. And I was responsible for the preparation, editing, and promotion of close to 400 feature films in my time at CBS.
Must have been interesting work.
It was good work.
Back when they had movies of the week. And
yeah, exactly. Tonight on the CBS Thursday night movie, yes.
Yeah, that was an interesting time.
Yeah, it was good. I learned a lot about film.
Well, that came in handy, didn't it?
It sure did.
Steve has produced a film called Only a Number. And Steve, tell us about the film.
Well, Only a Number is the story of my parents. My parents were both Holocaust survivors. My mom was from Hungary and my dad was from Poland. And the circumstance of the Holocaust was actually how they met. They met in a concentration camp in Germany that they were both imprisoned in. And they fell in love through a barbed wire fence without the aid of a common language. And they were liberated about 2 or 3 weeks after they met by the U.S. Army as they were being transported out of the camp with hundreds and hundreds of other people and prisoners. And they were to be annihilated. It was at the end of the war, and the Nazis were losing, and the edict that came down was to vacate the camps and destroy the evidence, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So what prompted you to take on telling your mother's story?
Well, that's a great question, and people often ask me how long it took me to make the film, and I tell them 35 years because it actually began. I was not a stranger to the fact that my parents were Holocaust survivors and what that meant, and it explained a lot about my family. Explained why my parents had numbers on their arms, and it explained why I didn't have grandparents, and it just explained a lot about my parents' attitudes and behaviors and the way it affected them. But so I wasn't a stranger to the subject of the Holocaust and the stories of my family, but the notion of sharing my mom's story actually came to me those many years ago when on a visit to my parents, my mother shared with me this writing exercise that she had taken upon herself. She was always trying to improve her written English. And she would select words from the dictionary that she was unfamiliar with and then try and use them in a passage or two. And she wrote something down on a piece of paper and she handed me her work and very innocently asked me, what I thought of her exercise, And I looked down at this list of words and I looked down at this paragraph, and when I read the paragraph, which was a very mundane entry, she had gone somewhere with one of my aunts and they went to a store, and something she saw on a store shelf reminded her of an incident that happened to her in Auschwitz. And she wrote about that in the middle of this paragraph. And it was so strong and emotionally gripping to me to see in her very simple language relating this experience. She came up to me thinking that I was reacting to her language exercise, and I just said, Mom, I was familiar with this story, but somehow when I read it in your words, it was really powerful, and it makes me want to ask you to do something that's going to be very hard, emotionally and physically, to capture all of your memories from the time you were growing up as a young girl and when the Nazis invaded your country, and your experiences during the Holocaust and how you met my father, and And she very contemplatively just nodded her head. And then 6 weeks later, when I went back for a visit, my mom had filled 4 spiral notebooks, both sides of the page, with all of her memories. And they weren't in, the proper sequence, but when she handed me these books and said, "I did what you asked me to do," that was when I knew that I was going to have to find a way to share her story. And the notion of the documentary came to me many years later when my mom was diagnosed with dementia and she started to lose her memories, including having written all of these diary entries. And I knew that I needed to use my skills and experience and talent for filmmaking to go back to all of the locations of her experience and use her words to tell the story.
How did you start? What was the first thing that you had to get together to make this a reality?
Well, originally, I had transposed all of these handwritten pages into typewritten pages and put them in order and then filled in the blanks. There were some questions and holes in the timing and certain things that were happening to other people in the family while my mom was, in different locations, and so I needed to just sort of fill in those blanks. So I drew up lists of questions, but always tried to keep my mom's voice. The film is very much in her voice. So that's how I started putting together the script, per se, for the story. And then I had some inspiration from the film Night and Fog, which is a film by Alan Renee, who 10 years after the end of the war, in 1955, he went to 3 of the death camps that were now desolate and overgrown, but there were still remnants of the past in his footage of these long lilting pans of the territories, and very powerful narration of the things that took place there, along with archival footage of the findings of the liberators and things. And that really inspired me to make the documentary the way I did, which was to go back and walk in the footsteps of my parents and capture the present, but finding the remnants of her past and her story in those various locations. And I found many.
How did you tell your mother that you were making this documentary?
Well, it was difficult. Her dementia had progressed to the point where it really affected a lot of her, certainly her short-term memory, but even started to affect more and more of her long-term memory. But I told her, and my dad also helped, sort of make her understand that what I really needed to do and wanted to do was to go back to Europe and her hometown and the places where she was in ghettos and concentration camps, and my father as well, and tell her story. And she at that time had really begun to forget that she wrote this post facto diary, and that was really painful for me, because it just showed the advancement of her disease. But when I told her that I was using her book and her story to make this film, I think she related to it a little bit more. And then when I finished the film and showed it to her, it was in the moment, at that point in her disease, in the moment, she was very cognizant of everything, but literally in the moment. As soon as that moment had passed, she just forgot what that was.
That's powerful. What I found incredibly fascinating about the movie was the amount of camps your mother had been transferred through. And when you see the Hollywood version of these things, it's they're in one camp or they're in 2, and they're shifted from one place to the other, and then that's it. But your mother went through 5 different camps, 5 or
I
7.
think it was
different
5. And yeah, and my dad the same. And she was in Auschwitz twice, actually. Several camps and factories. And she also was in Plaszow, which is the camp. You know, you mentioned Schindler's List, and she had her own encounter with Amon Geth, who was the evil commander, played by Ray Fiennes in the film. And,
Yes.
But she had her own.
And I will say he
encounter
looks
with him.
nothing like Ray Fiennes in real life.
No,
no.
not at all. But as a matter of fact, my mom, in her story and in her post facto diary and in the film, talks about the same scene that was depicted in Schindler's List, where they discover some missing food rations or something, and Amon Geth lined up prisoners, and he just went to every other one, and he shoots every other one dead as an example to the others, because of some missing food ration or something, and my mother describes that very scene as happening while she was in that camp.
Yes, and your mother also came across Dr. Mengele.
She did.
I will tell you, it's a very powerful point in this film, how she narrowly escaped death at his hands. We're going to be showing the trailer from this film, and Princeton TV is also going to be running this film. It is powerful and it's gripping, but just when I was watching that part of it, I just had to sit back and pause it for a minute and be like, what a breather. It just really, it gets you.
It really was.
Think about it.
It was a very narrow escape.
Spoil it, but
yeah, right. We won't
it was
spoil.
a narrow escape.
Yeah.
Tell us, what was it like for you to go back to these places and trace your mother's footsteps with her story?
It was incredibly emotional and in some ways cathartic for me. And as I said, I was not a stranger to the stories, and I've spent a lot of time growing up and even in my adult life, reading many books and many stories of people, visiting museums, taking virtual tours of the death camps in Auschwitz. And no matter, with all that I did, going there, being there, literally walking in the footsteps of my parents on the grounds of these places where such horrific things happen and where I lost relatives in my family, and was just, at times it was almost paralyzing. I took on the feelings that were very much related to the story. So, for example, when I was in Hungary, in my mom's hometown, there was this, feeling of, wow, what a great family she had, and a family life that she had, and the property of her home, and the farm, and the small village, and the camaraderie of the neighbors, and, what a wonderful life it must have been, for her. So that just, I was exuding this good feeling of being there. Plus, I was there when it was her birthday and singing happy birthday to her on the phone. And so that was good. And when I was walking the grounds in Auschwitz, I was just paralyzed. I was overcome with the emotion of the things that took place there, as the guide who was with us every step of the way while we were filming was expounding upon all of these facts and the numbers of people on a daily basis who were destroyed and murdered, and then those who were living under hard labor conditions and tortured, and I was just completely downtrodden, and it was certainly more so for me because I had my mom's words swirling around in my head as I was going through these places. But it very much affected my good friend and the director of photography on the film, Gerardo Puglia, who is a Princeton resident, by the way. But Gerardo was, pretty much equally overcome with emotion. There were times when we had to just sort of stop and just, let things settle within us, because it was very powerful.
Okay. How did it change the way you look at your mom to do this?
Well, I think it changed me in a number of ways. Being very familiar with the stories and being very familiar with my mom's diary for all those years, which I inherited when I was, in my early 20s. I always looked at my parents as my heroes. Kids growing up, Superman was a hero, or the Green Hornet, or Batman. But I never had to look very far from my heroes, because knowing their story and knowing what they went through, and just seeing the strength within them and the love that still existed within them, they were my heroes. So I don't know if my perspective of my mom changed, other than it put me more in touch with the story and more in touch with the experiences, because I felt, I was kind of like walking through that. Certainly I couldn't relate to the point of like, how could somebody live through this? But the other thing it did for me is, not in the film, but in my mom's diary, she said people often asked her how she survived the starvation, how she survived the beatings and the cruelty, and seeing other people murdered, and losing her mother, and how did she possibly survive? And she said that sometimes I think I survived just so that I could tell about it. And that makes me feel that since I'm the child of survivors, and having made the film, there's a reason for that. There's like, I think I was born to do this and to keep sharing the story.
To tell the story.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a look at a clip right now. We're actually going to take a look at the trailer for Only a Number.
My parents, Joseph and Aranka, are survivors of the Holocaust, and I learned at a very early age what that meant.
Can you read the number? 178558.
My mother has dementia, and many years before this insidious disease began to eat away at her memories, a simple self-taught language exercise led to the memoir she wrote, and created the resulting diary that was the story of how my parents met, how they fell in love, and what my mom endured during the Holocaust. My mother can no longer tell her story, so I decided to do it by following the path of her journey in the present and looking for the remnants of her past. It is a true story of the struggle to survive, to love, and to remember.
One morning, as I went to work in the city, I saw some strange-looking soldiers. I asked my boss who these soldiers were, and he told me that we were under German occupation. Jewish people had to obey the new laws set down by the Germans. The yellow star, which had to be displayed prominently on our outer clothing, was only the beginning. We were not permitted on the streets of the city during curfew hours, and people became afraid for their lives and those of their families. We were marched out of the Hot One ghetto to the train. All of the Jews were loaded onto the cattle cars. I cannot tell you how many people were squeezed into one car. There was no room to move. There was only one small window in the car we were in. There wasn't much air, and we felt as if we would suffocate. There was a bucket and a blanket in one corner of the car. This was how we were to dispose of our waste. There was a deadly silence, or at times crying, screaming, and praying. The train kept going for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, oh God, finally the train stopped.
And there we have the clip from Only a Number. Steve, what is the meaning of the title?
Well, the title was my mother's choice. She actually, on one of the notebooks where she captured her memories, there's one page that's filled with various titles. And but Only a Number came to her because even in the film she says we were only a number. You know, we weren't considered human beings. We were just a number. Because once they tattooed prisoners with a number, that was your only identity. And my mom recognized that. So that's why the title was chosen for Only a Number. And the graphic illustration, which are these two arms clutching, I mean, that was my concept. And those are my parents' numbers. So one arm has my mom's number, and the other arm has my dad's number. And I worked with George Pimentel, a good friend and a wonderful artist, to create the title graphic, because I said George was familiar with the story from me telling him, and I just said I just see these two arms clutching each other for survival, clutching each other out of love, and depicting the numbers that they were given that became their only identity. So thus, Only a Number.
Only a Number. Well, I will say from the concentration camps, your parents' love was born, you were born, and now something else has been born of this. I understand.
Okay.
It's your encore career.
Yes, it is.
What is your encore career?
I'm a senior too. I created AriJoe Productions for the purpose of making the documentary Only a Number. For various reasons, I needed to create a company, and I took my lead from the Weinstein brothers, who at one point named their first film company Miramax Pictures, because their mother was Miriam and their father was Max. So my mom's name was Aranka. Her birth name was Aranka, a Hungarian name, but everybody in the family called her Ari. And my dad was Joseph, or Joseph, and everybody called him Joe. So thus AriJoe Productions. So I've now expanded AriJoe Productions, and I'm making short documentary films for small to mid-sized businesses, for nonprofit organizations. I did a piece for Homefront recently, and most importantly, perhaps, is helping people tell their stories of their lives and their families, and so that they could capture, preserve, and share their family histories. And I made one short film thus far for a family. It's called Bunny. It's on my website. Anybody can see it at arijoe.com. And Bunny is a 98-year young woman whose family was very interested in capturing her life story, because so much of her life story is their family history. And with all of the move toward genealogy, and since I made Only a Number, which captures my family history, I can't tell you the countless numbers of people that I've come across who see the film and who just say, you know, my grandfather was a World War II vet, and you know, if only I had sat down and gotten his story, or I don't know much about my aunt, you know, Lillian, but she, you know. So I think it's really important for people to take the time, especially as we grow older and time goes on, to capture it, because generations currently and future generations are very much interested in their family histories and where they came from, and everybody has a story. And there are a lot of good stories out there, and I would just love helping people tell their stories.
It's true. I counsel people a lot with that, is, you know, to find out your grandmother's story, find out your mother's story, because once they're gone, those stories are gone. all you will have is a vague recollection. It's a great idea for you to be able to sit down with the family and tell their story, especially if grandmom or mom is still here, and you can go through her life with her.
Very true.
Makes a fantastic present. How would somebody get in touch with you to find out about doing this?
They can send me an email. My email address is steveb@arijoe.com. And if they prefer to phone me, my AriJoe number is 609-577-9206. And I also offer a free consultation and production estimate, so I can talk to people about what would be involved in helping them tell their story with this video documentary storytelling that I do. And I'm happy to do that, and I try and make it affordable. I do things as a one-man band, kind of, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. So please, I'll help you tell your story.
Good. Well, the name of the film is Only a Number. My guest, Steve Besserman, with AriJoe Productions. Website again?
www.arijoe.com. That's ARIJOE.com.
Well, Steve, thank you for coming on Only Seniors to tell your story and to tell your mother's story. Look for Only a Number to be running here right on Princeton Television. I'm Tom Callahan. Thank you for joining us.